What does a grant writer do? And what are some of the responsibilities aspiring grant writers can expect on the job? In this video, we're going to answer that question. Hey there, my name's Josh and I'm the founder of Technical Writer HQ, and I have over 10 years of technical writing experience. And today we'll be talking specifically about grant writers, what does their job role and responsibilities look like, and some practical examples of grant writing. And if you're not familiar at all with grant writing, don't worry. That's what we're here for. But before we dive into the topic, please take a moment to hit that subscribe button, thumbs up this video, and activate notifications by clicking the bell icon. And that way you don't miss any of our future videos that teach you how to become a better writer. And very excited that you're here. One of the things to note is I've been teaching grant writing for the last several years at Technical Writer HQ, so we have a ton of knowledge here to share today. So happy that you've taken the step. But before we get into the grant writer responsibilities, we need to know what a grant writer is. And in modern terms, because grant writing has changed over time, a grant writer is someone who creates all the documents needed for a proper grant proposal, coordinates with the program manager and marketing department to market an organization's program efforts, and helps make all the policies and standard operating procedures for the program, and creates a literature that contains all those policies and SOPs. Grant writers working at government agencies are required to research grant-making trends at the local, state, and federal level, while also looking for new grant opportunities from both government and private sources. Now that we know what a grant writer is, let's go ahead and expand on some of their responsibilities, starting with how they create the actual proposal documentation. Depending on individual grant requirements, this means filling out the grant application forms on a grant maker's website, or at a public office where a grant maker accepts applications. Most grant application forms ask for a number of documents to be attached with each application. These include tax returns, info on the board members, and details of the program itself. To fulfill this requirement, grant writers have to collect tax documents from their finance department, compile data on the board members such as their names, the positions they hold in the organization, and any fundraising activities that they were ever a part of. Now, each type of application I may go through may really range in terms of how complex it is, so that's something to keep in mind. And since grant approval depends on how good the organization's program is, the writer has to include all the relevant details about the program, such as duration, scope, and expected outcomes. Finally, grant writers have to write the actual proposal letter that they'll send with all the documents mentioned here. And one of the important things to note is that if you want to have success as a grant writer, it's important to attach yourself to great organizations with great missions. Otherwise, you'll be just trying to cover a poor mission with your grant writing. And here's an example of a basic grant proposal letter. I took this off an online source of official letter samples. This specific letter requests a grant for a small community project that will serve the members of the local population. The letter layout is simple. It starts off with a request for funds, states how the program is vital to the vision and a mission statement of the organization, and then proceeds to explain what the project is about. Towards the end, it provides a supporting statement that mentions how the organization has other parties helping implement the project. An important part of the grant writer's job description is to coordinate between the senior management and the heads of marketing in the organization. This means connecting the two departments by becoming a line of communication or a middle person who holds meetings with both departments, informs marketing about whatever decisions the management has taken, and based on those decisions, builds a case for the program in the grant application. Some grant writers will also help design the marketing material for the program, depending on how deeply they're involved in the actual program. This can range from writing a copy for all the funding proposals that will go out to just creating proposal documents based on the specifications of a grant maker. In case there's more than one grant maker providing funds for a project, the writer will coordinate between both and draft documents such as agreements, receipts, and more. The grant writer job description is based around writing the proposal in a way that's likely to gain the program some funding. However, they also have a say in the program policies and how the program will be conducted. This is because they are the ones researching what grant makers want from the programs they fund, as well as their overall requirements with regards to the grant. They take that information and use it to discuss the program strategy with the board of directors. Part of this is negotiating with the upper management and decision makers to implement the program activities that grant makers demand. Based on whatever the results of those meetings are, grant writers create a program roadmap to attach with it the proposal. Any social or community program will need probably flyers, posters, social media ads, or other literature to help spread the word and inform people about it. And depending on the organization that they're in, grant writers may need to craft the program literature as well. This is because the program message that gets sent out to the grant maker will be similar to the one sent out into the community. Grant writers will create the ideal message by listing all the appropriate program features that they believe will gain grant maker approval. They will relate those features with the strengths of the organization and how it's equipped to implement those program features. If the organization has already been successful with similar programs in the past, they'll mention that in the literature. All of this is to create a compelling mission statement that's more likely to attract funding. Of course, they'll also have to make sure all the literature and documentation follows a similar format, ideally the one required by a grant maker. On the surface, grants are just money or resources you get for a purpose, usually a program or activity that will benefit the public or a specific community. Unlike a loan, there's no stipulation for a return of the funds in a grant. It's important to know that it's part of a grant maker's job to look for patterns of funding cuts and availability at the local, state, and federal level. And how do you do this? Well, they do this by observing the general financial climate and researching the fiscal policies of their state representatives. And if they're taking a more direct approach, they will go ahead and call government reps regularly to confirm funding availability. And most grant writers will also be subscribed to newsletters from their relevant government grant-making offices. So that way they can keep up to date with any new grants that become available. And having the right set of proposal documents and credentials is one thing, but so is having available grants to apply to. This is where grant writers have to look for grant opportunities around the country. Luckily, there are several resources available to help them. For example, they'll browse through the Foundation Center website, which is a huge directory of grant-making foundations. And they'll contact people at the Grantmanship Center, which is a grant writer training and available grant resource. They'll subscribe to the Federal Register, which is a publication that features documents that are to be made public. This includes invitations for grant applications. And last year, they'll coordinate with government agencies to receive alerts whenever a grant is available. Now that we know a bit about the grant writing process, it's important to know who grant writers write to. There are actually many different kinds of grant makers, especially now that groups have found out how it's easier to provide funds by collaborating with other groups, instead of trying to accumulate funds to then offer grants. However, there are still 4 major types of grant makers that most grant writers will end up writing to. These are government agencies on every level, from your local DMV to the Treasury, community and corporate foundations that serve specific communities or demographics, federated funds which collect money from multiple sources for a common funding goal, and independent institutions which provide funds based on their own goals and missions. Almost all grant makers put out a request for proposal, or what's called an RFP, or an invitation for grant seekers to apply for programs that they can fund. Here's an example of a grant proposal invitation. Again, I got this off an online resource for grant-related documentation, and this specific invitation is part of a USAID request for proposals or RFP package that both government agencies and grant-making foundations put out. RFPs contain the actual invitation letter and set of guidelines for grant seekers. This one even defines stages for funding that a grant seeker can apply for based on their credentials or requirements. Government agencies have very strict rules about who gets funding. Bigger federal agencies often fund smaller agencies on the state level, and state agencies often fund local agencies on the city or county level. They have non-negotiable guidelines for anybody looking to attain funding. This means that they won't consider grant seekers even if they have the best programs. They also have larger funding available for high-level projects that either impact a lot of people or become newsworthy. Community and corporate foundations are entities set up by either major community officials and elected reps or big companies. Their purpose is to have a non-government source of funding for vulnerable communities or to fund projects that the government would otherwise not look into. They generally have flexible funding guidelines, and this means that even if a grant seeker doesn't have all the required credentials, there's still room for consideration. They're also less specific in terms of who they'd fund, meaning that they can fund a group of philanthropists, an NGO, or even individuals. On the other hand, they have fewer funds available to give. They also have a limited geographical scope and can't provide funds out of a specific geographical area. Federated funds are foundations that don't have money or other funding resources of their own. Instead, they pull money from other sources such as corporate donors, other foundations, even government agencies. They also hold fundraising events and operations on the community or citywide level. These foundations have varying amounts of funding available at any time. In effect, they act as the middleman between a donor and a grant seeker. Because they don't have their own money to offer, their funds are highly subject to availability. Last year, we have independent institutions that can be anything from your local credit organization to a high-level university. Just like the name suggests, they don't answer to another funding authority and have their own money to dispense. However, independent institutions are known to fund specific groups. This can be because they have a long-term funding contract with a specific group, or because the group aligns very strongly with their vision. On the other hand, they accept proposals from everyone, meaning that even if you're not the typical grant seeker, they won't reject your application outright. Most institutions are looking for community building efforts or academic research to fund. This is because institutions don't have the ability to go through the legal processes and red tape that funding on a higher scale requires. Plus, we can't expect an independent institution to find a program on the state level. They also most consist of financial institutions such as banks, credit unions, and hedge funds, as well as schools and higher education centers. And there you have it. We just covered what a grant writer does, their typical responsibilities on the job, and the types of organizations they write to for funding. And thank you for watching the video. Again, my name is Josh from Technical Writer HQ. And if you enjoyed the video, make sure to go ahead and subscribe to our channel so you can keep up to date with everything writing. And I wish you the best of success in your career as a grant writer and improving your grant writing skills. And if you're interested, make sure to go ahead and check out Technical Writer HQ's courses where we teach grant writing among technical writing and other subjects. And I'll go ahead and see you in some of our future videos. Cheers.